This is the CCW Digital Speaker Spotlight Series. I'm Brian Cantor, Principal Analyst for CCW Digital, and your host for today's discussion. When you think of core topics, key themes, common buzzwords within the customer contact environment, you surely land on the idea of culture. You surely land on the role that people play in driving the best possible customer experience. And we all accept that concept. We accept that connection. We take that link between happy agents, empowered agents, and happy customers for granted. We know it's right and it intuitively makes sense. But what we often overlook is exactly what that empowerment entails, exactly what it takes to transfer from a great internal culture into a great brand that truly connects with its customers outside the business. And that really, when you want to think about elevating your customer experience function, when you want to think about creating the best possible contact center, and frankly, when you want to think about making your place a great organization in which to work, you absolutely need to focus on what it takes to drive that real connection, what it takes to actualize this idea of a great culture of employee empowerment. One individual who has done that throughout his career, whether it was with the Disney Institute and now with Toll Brothers, is Kendall Jolly. He's going to be sharing his insights, his best practices, his advice at CCW Nashville this January, and we could not be more excited to really dive deep into the dynamics of what it takes to build a great culture and what it takes to really leverage that to create a great customer experience. But the good news is we don't have to wait all the way to January for the insights. He's about to share some of his perspectives here today, and we're thrilled to have him. So Kendall, how's everything going?
Everything is wonderful.
Great. And like I said, this topic is one of those areas where people can talk about this until they're blue in the face. They can give so many eloquent, great descriptions of why the employee experience matters, why culture matters. But what I like about your perspective and what I really want to focus on in today's discussion is kind of how you make that connection to results. Whether those results are employee satisfaction, a better customer experience, the reason you're thinking about culture is ultimately to derive certain outcomes. And I know that you think very carefully about what it takes to really create those outcomes.
Absolutely. The business results happen because a great experience was created for the customer. And it's important to realize that you can create results without having a great experience, but those results will not sustain over time. The only way to build loyalty and brand affinity is to create this exceptional experience with your users so that they want to come back and do business with you again and again and again. And the way to do that is by making sure that employee experience, that employees are motivated and inspired, that they're engaged in their work, and they're asked for input on decisions that affect their output. And when you create that sort of an environment in the workplace, it simply transcends over to the customer experience, making the customers more satisfied, making them happier, keeping them customers for life, which ultimately drive those business results.
Now, I think the big bucket word that describes a lot of what you just talked about is this notion of empowerment, employee empowerment. Now, again, we know that as the buzzword, but I'm wondering if you can kind of detail what that is in terms of a best practice. So when you look at a contact center, how do you really know whether the employees are empowered? Or not even just a contact center, anywhere in the organization. What are some signs, what are some examples of real empowerment at play?
Well, I think first you have to be willing, leadership has to step up and be willing to loosen the reins a bit and to give people some autonomy and to give them some decision-making authority around things that are going to impact that customer experience without always having to run to get approval or someone's okay to do something. When you think about a customer call center, one of the greatest things that I've seen around empowerment is putting a mirror on everyone's desk, so that when you are talking to someone on the phone, that you're seeing that there's a smile on your face. When there's a smile on your face, there's a smile on your voice. But that empowerment goes even further. In today's workplace, dress code is a big thing, but dress code also impacts the culture of the organization and how people get things done. Well, in a call center, I don't know if you're wearing sweats, pajamas, or if you're dressed in a business suit. And quite honestly, as the consumer, it doesn't really matter to me. What matters to me is what I hear in your voice and what is the context and the content of of what you're saying to me over the phone. Now, empowerment, loosening the reins, being willing to allow people to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes is a leadership trait that goes hand in hand with being able to empower your people and giving them some autonomy over decisions that affect their work.
Now, we often talk about empowerment from a leadership perspective. We urge leaders, directors of the call center, chief customer officers to empower their employees. And you also just talked about the impact and the benefits for customers. But I'm going to bring up a side that we often don't consider in these conversations, and that's employees. I mean, are employees, from your perspective, really clamoring for empowerment? Does it really kind of elevate their opinion of their job based on how empowered they are?
Well, and I think, a key component of that, especially from the employee level, is their peer-to-peer recognition in your organization. When people help you out and provide some sort of action or assistance that makes something easier, makes the customer interaction go more smoothly, that helps perhaps lighten your load, what sort of mechanisms are in place for that employee to be able to recognize their fellow employee? And recognition is not reward. It doesn't have to be money. It doesn't have to be some item. It's just, how do you give those pats on the back and those thank you very much from one employee to another? What do you have in place to do that? Because when you empower me, I'm willing to take that empowerment, but if I don't get any sort of reinforcement that what I'm doing is the right thing, then I may be reluctant to do it again in the future.
Definitely. So, and that, again, talks, I think, about a great culture. And I think there's a lot when we talk about employee empowerment. Culture is certainly part of it. And there's other factors like technology and metrics that I imagine. So what are some best practices you think at the high level to make sure that your organization is even capable of empowering employees?
Well, I think you have to look at leadership, and you have to look at what are the accepted traits and behaviors of the leaders inside an organization that really drive that empowerment. Are leaders always looking to protect themselves, or are they looking to develop their people to take care of the customer? It's really just sort of a shift in the mindset from, as a leader, my job is to support my team and to support the people that work for me and to remove any hassles and roadblocks that prevent them from being able to offer the absolute best experience that they are able to. And oftentimes, as leaders, we forget that and we think we have to have the answer. We have to go out and do the work. We have to come in and be the hero that saves the day, rather than creating an environment in which we create heroes from the people who work for us.
Makes sense. Now, I wonder, obviously culture is something that in your background is certainly a big part of your mission. It's a big part of your experience, and certainly it's something you're passionate about. And I just as empowerment can be a buzzword, culture can be a hollow, superficial concept in conversation, right? I mean, a lot of times people will point to little things that certain brands are doing that seem really cool, but I'd imagine culture is a little bit more deeper. It's more deep and more substantive than just some little pizza parties or bright colored desks or whatever. So from your perspective, what does a great culture really mean in the customer-facing environment?
Culture is something that every organization has. There's no organization out there that doesn't have the culture. The question becomes, do we as an organization have the culture that we desire, or do we have a culture that has been created over time by default? Culture can be defined. In fact, I use James Heskett's definition in which he says that culture is simply the way we do things around here, what goes and what doesn't. And so when you think about it, culture really is as simple as the actions and behaviors of the group of people who make up an organization. And what are the standards and the norms that that organization accepts, not necessarily desires at that point in time, but accepts. And if you want to create a better culture, a stronger culture, then we have to change the expectations and what we're willing to accept inside an organization. It sounds simple, but it's actually very, very challenging and difficult to do without diligence and intentionality.
Now, what you just described there, that's going to be pretty independent of organization, right? Every industry wants to think about culture through that framework. But I'm wondering, at what point do you start to think about your specific employees, your specific industry, your specific region, company size, customer base? How do you start to take into account some of those individual factors that make your brand, and how should that maybe impact the culture you as a leader try to espouse?
So as a leader, I must have two things. I must have a compelling vision. I'm not talking about the corporate vision. I'm talking about my own personal compelling vision of how tomorrow can be better than today. And my vision must align with the corporate values, and I must do everything in my power as a leader to make sure that those values are being lived into each and every day. So if I want to, focus on culture, then what I have to focus on are the language that we use, the actions that we accept, the standards and the norms inside the organization, and also think about the traditions that we have, how we reinforce those traditions over time, because all of that works together to create that great corporate culture that we all desire so much. In my experience with both Disney Institute as well as now with Toll Brothers, I've lived in very strong cultures, and I've lived in places where I lived and worked in places where we needed to really focus on what are the expectations that we have for our people? Because when we do not give clear expectations, we have an undefined culture, and we accept that culture by default rather than being very intentional and creating that culture by design that we desire.
Now, clearly culture is one of the things that's going to need to be reinforced. You talked about how can you make tomorrow better than today, and so naturally it's not something that you say, okay, today's the day we build our culture, and then it's going to last us for the next 10 years. It's something you're constantly thinking about. And so what are some things to sort of make sure that you're reinforcing it and adapting as your workforce changes, as your needs change, as your customers change, to make sure that you constantly not only have a culture in place, but the right culture for that given point in time?
Well, I think one of the things that I think is so integral to building the culture that you want is making sure that we clearly define what it is that we want. Part of that is what are the values of the organization, and how do we reinforce those values with thank yous, with recognition. When people display the right things, the right behaviors, the right actions, the right attitudes, how do we call them out to say, that's what I'm talking about? That is exactly what I'm looking for. I think back to when I first joined the Disney company, I was a singer in the group Voices of Liberty at the American Adventure. And in my first 6 months, I was brought in for a mid-year review and was told, Kendall, the way that you go out on the floor and you sing your 8 sets every day, and the energy in your face, yes, musically, we're not even going to talk about that, but the energy in your face, you are the model for everybody else in that group. If everybody had that sort of level of enthusiasm and energy, then we would not need to have these, half-yearly reviews with everybody. And to me, that was sort of that first point of recognition and someone reinforcing that, hey, you're doing your job. You're going out there, and not only are you doing it, but you're the model for everybody else to look to say, this is how I should do it. I think when we can take that simple act and we can look at our people and say, who's the model? Who's the person who's the best at? And then whatever that thing is that you're looking for that helps define who you are as an organization. When you can begin to recognize those individuals and find out, first of all, do they like public recognition? They prefer private recognition. But when you can reinforce the right actions and the right behaviors, you're going to impact your culture in a way that will have far-reaching benefits.
Now, one of the things you referenced there was that the energy that you displayed, the look on your face, the smile, that was a good way to help to kind of demonstrate the right model for a great employee, really help to kind of make culture more infectious and help it really spread within the organization. Makes perfect sense. But in today's environment, we aren't always going to be looking at our employees in the face. I mean, we have people that are working throughout the globe. We have different offices. We have people working from home. We have different generations of employees who gravitate toward different personalities and have different goals. So when you have all these different factors that are fragmenting your workforce, so to speak, how do you still maintain a culture that is clearly visible and also clearly resonant with all these different people?
Right. Today's workforce, it certainly makes things a bit more challenging at times. Being geographically dispersed, the diversity of our workforce, we've got multiple generations working in the same roles across geography. It does make it more challenging. But I would encourage you as leaders, it is your job to know what your people are doing. Wherever they may be, take time to listen in on phone calls. Take time to ask other employees and other peers who interact with them, how are they doing? Get feedback from a variety of sources so that you can give direct, honest feedback to each employee as to how they are performing in the role.
And I imagine that also extends to outsourcers as well, right? I mean, when you think of, I don't know the extent to which you're actually using outsourced labor, but just from a high level perspective, I'm sure that when you think about vendor partners or outsourcers or anyone who might be representing your brand, you want to make sure that you're communicating and instilling your culture in them as well.
Absolutely. At the Disney company, we required all of the contractors to attend the first day orientation so that they all had the same basic level of understanding of the company that they were joining and what those expectations are. We do something similar here at Toll Brothers, where with our partners and our contractors, we require them to know what our values are and to say, this is what's important to us, and when you violate these values, then it's not going to be a great partnership, and it's probably not going to work out. Just taking the time to share that information and to share those expectations with everyone who's going to be associated with your brand is vitally important to you continuing to build those business results that you want to build.
And now, I honestly hate myself for asking this question, but it's important. I know that culture goes beyond numbers. It goes beyond the quantitative day-to-day. It's something that really defines your brand at the absolute highest level, and it really needs to trickle down, I think, in a way that it's about mentality and it's about understanding. But at the end of the day, results do matter. Numbers do matter. Success does matter. And so how do you know, is there a way to know whether the culture you're creating, the culture you're cultivating, is translating into the right results for your business?
What I find so fascinating is that we say all the time, our culture is just these behaviors that our people are doing. But we also know that ultimately those bottom line numbers are equivalent to what are our people doing every day? What are those actions and behaviors that our people are performing with our customers each and every day? That is ultimately what drives the bottom line. And yet, as business leaders, we spend so much of our time focused on those numbers rather than focusing on the people who are producing those numbers. So how do we think about spending more time on developing our people, letting them know their expectations, coaching them to higher levels of performance, making them better at what they do, because ultimately we know that what they're doing is what's driving our bottom line, versus us always sitting in those meetings with the spreadsheets going, how can we cut 10% here? How can we cut 5% here? How can we squeeze every nickel out of our bottom line, when some of that energy should be spent making our people better?
Tremendous advice. And that's only, for those listening, just a taste of what amazing insights I know Kendall's going to be able to share come CCW Nashville this January. So definitely check that out. But before we part ways, Kendall, we focused on your topic. We focused on the business stuff for a while. I want to lighten things up and get to know you. I think that's a huge factor here, because there are plenty of smart, insightful people out there. But one of the things we're really proud of with our speaking faculty is that you're the kind of people that I think can really connect with our audience on site. You're going to be great people with whom to network. And so we really want to get to know you a little bit and make sure our audience gets to know you. So we'll start really simply. Have you ever been to Nashville?
I have been to Nashville. I've been to Nashville a number of times. I went to college in Oklahoma and have a music education degree, but for a number of years I actually traveled the country and performed. And performing brought me to Nashville and to that Opryland Hotel, especially several times. And I've gone back on my own just a number of times. It's a great city, so much to do, such great energy, so vibrant, and I really look forward to being there in January.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's a tremendous endorsement for the venue that we're going to be hosting this event. But I do wonder, you clearly love Nashville, but is it your favorite place to vacation? If not, where is?
I must confess, when I vacation, I like two different kinds of things. Number one, I love to go to New York and see theater and have great food and walk the city and, need the vacation at the end of that sort of vacation. But I also love going to the desert in California and just being able to sit by a pool, have a cold drink, and look up at the mountains and enjoy the warmth of the sunshine as well. So, I think what I enjoy is as diverse as who I am. A Southern Mississippi-born man, went to school in Oklahoma, traveled the world, singing my way around the world, settled in Orlando, Florida, worked for Disney, moved to Jacksonville, Florida, and now I split my time between Jacksonville and Philadelphia, and I've had fun all along the way.
So when you're having fun, when you're getting involved in all those different adventures, when you're traveling the world, when you're encountering all that diversity, what emerged as your biggest guilty pleasure?
Oh, food is most definitely my guilty pleasure. If you followed me on Facebook, you would see that I post more pictures of food than I do of people. And there is very little that I'm not willing to try. My favorite is a great cupcake.
Now we know what we need to put on the order for the hotel when we come to this event. So it's amazing the amount of speakers that we've had answer some variation of food or drink there. So it's really creating the high standards for our operations team to make sure they get catering right. But then sort of tying it back to business a little bit. So do you have a business role model, and that could be a company you look up to or a particular person that you really admire?
So early in my career, I had a manager, and I'm going to say his name was Jay. And Jay brought me in. I had been performing for a number of years and was moving into my first office role. And Jay brought me in, and he took me into his office, and we spent about half the day actually just talking about the new job, what the expectations were, what we were going to be focused on. And then he said, "Hey, do you have some time? I'd love to walk you around the park." And he began to, we took a tour of the park, and he began to show me how to look at the park through a manager's eyes. I was not yet a manager. And I started learning, and after we walked the park, he took me to lunch, and we started getting to know each other on a personal level. By the end of the day, he had invested so much time and energy in me that I would have followed him through fire. He was truly an exemplary leader. And what I learned from him was when I make investments in my people, they come back to me again and again and again. And the way to get promoted is to develop your people to push you out of a job up to the next level. And so I have Jay to thank for a lot of the knowledge and the training that I received in the last 25 years.
So that's Jay's advice, but as we close, I'm wondering if you have your advice for someone who's trying to evolve in their own career and become more successful as a leader or just in their current role.
I have for the last 7 years been focused on how to help people get better at leadership effectiveness, corporate culture, employee engagement, and customer service. And what I have found is that when you stop for just a moment and you sit down and you begin to connect with people one-on-one, or in small groups, and you find out what's really going on in an organization, you find out that most of us are very similar. There are few differences. Even though our industries may vary, people are people. And so how do we invest in our people? How do we build our people up? How do we develop our people to help them reach their full potential? And when we do that, we create a better experience for the customer and ultimately better results for the corporation. And so my goal over the next 15 to 20 years of my career is continuing to help organizations find that true potential in their people and help them develop that.
Well, you have the right mindset, you have the right approach, and so I know that you're certainly going to make an impact in terms of cultivating the right environment. Your advice is certainly going to resonate with people. And so I want to thank you for sharing your insights today. I want to express my excitement and my appreciation for what's sure to be a great session in Nashville this winter. And again, Kendall, thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian.
And for CCW Digital, this has been Brian Cantor.